Welcome back to Control the Freak, where we talk about all things Control Freak related. Whether you're a controlling person who wants help to understand the things you do and how to stop it, or you live with or know somebody else who lives with a controlling person, and you want to understand either how to navigate that behaviour or know when and how to extract yourself from it, hopefully you're going to find the answer in this series of videos. My name's Sean Johnson. I'm going to walk you through all of the above. We're going to look at social media today. It's a massive topic. It's not one that we could cover in one video because, unfortunately, if you want to understand controlling behaviour, there's a wealth of information online, particularly in the way people use social media. And I happen to think that we've enabled the worst type of control freak, the coercively controlling type, in the rules and the laws regarding online conduct. Just before we get into that little segue, I'm rewatching Game of Thrones. I've watched it now. I think this is the fourth time I'm watching it. It's fantastic. It's not usually the kind of thing that I would watch. Never really liked Lord of the Rings and things like that. But Game of Thrones is something else, at least the first 6 seasons. The world building, the character arcs, unbelievable. Rewatching it again, I'm seeing little things that happen in season 1 that don't come back round again till season 5 that I remember being really important, but not seeing them the first time. That's how cleverly written it is. It's fantastic. But the thing about Game of Thrones is it's not just about the main characters. There's little subsets of characters that are just important, and you don't see how important they are till the end. And there's a character in one of these subsets who's still quite near the top called Littlefinger. Now, Littlefinger is an absolute monster. He uses every control tool in the box, whether it's coercion, whether it's manipulation, whether it's threats, whether it's violence, you name it, this guy uses it. His character arc is that he's a young lad who washes on the shore somewhere and he comes into contact with some low-level royalty and he falls in love with one of the young girls in this low-level royal family and he gets his fingers burnt a little bit. It doesn't go well for him. And you could say this is his event because it changes him forever. And he starts setting about to make sure that he's not going to remain low level. He's going to work his way to the very top. And he does this by manipulating his way through when he's younger until he eventually buys himself a whorehouse and he becomes a whoremaster. And once he's got this whorehouse, and it's a very high-class whorehouse in King's Landing, he uses it to extract information from the men that come to visit. And these are soldiers and these are low-level advisors, and then eventually there's royalty, and everyone goes there because he's got the best girls. All the time he's extracting information, and he's doing lots of dirty little deeds and manipulating outcomes with the information that he's getting. He's starting to understand how people work, and he makes sure he's pushing at the boundaries of what he can get away with. Eventually, the royal family, the Lannisters, recognise what this guy can do, and they think, right, we're going to use him. And they bring him on board and he makes his way onto the small council. And there he's advising the king. And he's always looking at ways he can stretch the rules. And it looks like he's doing it to benefit the Lannisters. But in the background, he has his eye on the Iron Throne. It's all about outright control for Littlefinger. You might be able to see where I'm going with this. So let's look at what I see is the control arc of social media, how I see it's gone. I used to have social media back in the early days. I think when I started, there was only Friends Reunited and Facebook. And I had a Facebook account for probably about 2 years. If you could go back and look at that account, you would see a blueprint for how the wrong kind of person uses social media. But it's deleted now. I deleted all of the contents. I'll get to why shortly. But I couldn't delete the profile. I found that very sinister. The idea that I couldn't control that, to me, was very sinister. Why do you want to keep my account if I don't want to do it anymore? And that put me off social media for life, really, and it's probably one of the better decisions I ever made. But if I think about how Facebook and Friends Reunited were used back in the early days, the appearance was that it was trying to reconnect people that had lost touch. So you'd be looking for old school friends or old friends, old workmates and things. And there was little clues that you could use to find them. If it was somebody, John Smith, who was a big Man United fan, you might type in John Smith and see a Man United logo in his bio and go, that's the guy, and you get back in touch. And you'd see whether people had got married, whether they had kids, where they were living now, where they worked. And it was a great way to get back in touch with people, for people that were using it for the right reasons. But that's not a great business model if you want lots of eyes looking in one direction. If you've got thousands of pockets all around the world of just little communities, it's very difficult to get everybody looking in the right direction. And the business model of social media is they make money through advertising. So they want everyone to look in one direction. So they start expanding people's nets, and you start to see options like invite a friend, or you might know this person. And you start to connect with people that were, to begin with, just on the periphery of the people you knew. They would know somebody that you knew, and that's why they'd be suggested. But the obvious knock-on effect of that is that how these nets start to spread, the periphery gets further and further, and how well you might know somebody if they're a friend of a friend of a friend starts to move further out of reach, but people were still clicking on it. The whole thing was to have as many friends as possible. So you would have people getting 600, 1,000, 2,000 friends. Nobody's got 2,000 friends. I certainly didn't, but there's a good reason for that. But it was all about having as many friends as you could for some people online. But if you think about how society works with controlling people, the fact is that generally they only have very local success because their community keeps them in check to some degree. They manage that behaviour. They warn people about you, and people start to move away from you, and that keeps you in check to some degree. But if you've now got 2,000 friends to choose from, and half of that stop interacting with you, what's left is the sort of people that either can't be bothered to interact with you or maybe agree with what you have to say, like your point of view. And as time goes on and you realise that nobody else is interacting with you, but these people really are, naturally you're going to interact with those people even more. And things start to get a little bit tribal then, because you're all talking about the same thing all of the time. Now, control freaks are very disagreeable people, so a lot of people won't want to interact with them. But if you can find a little group that does want to interact with you, you're going to focus on that group. And then you start to get little groups that would start to focus on things that were important to them. And it might be social justice, it might be conservation, it might be a war that's happening on the other side of the world, it might be your favourite political party, it might be Brexit or something like that, that you're all talking about and you're all seeing eye to eye. But the other thing about social media is if you say the right thing that somebody else agrees with, they can give you a little tick or a thumbs up, and your comment moves up the ranks. And you have to remember that controlling people have got very low self-esteem generally, unless they're narcissistic. You get a little tick, it's an unbelievable ego boost, that. So you start saying more of that stuff. You start getting more ticks. You start to move up. And all the while in the background, social media is saying, this person over here is saying something similar. Let me suggest them. So the net's getting wider and the groups are getting a little bit bigger. But while that's happening, there might be somebody who suggested to you who might have some of your opinions, but not all of them. And woe betide any one of those people that steps into this group and says the wrong thing, because now that group rounds on them. As I say, it's become very tribal, and now they attack. And it gets very, very nasty. And there's some awful stories about people taking their lives and having their lives ruined because they've said the wrong thing to the wrong person. Now, there's an interview with Jack Dorsey, I think it was 2019, on Joe Rogan, and he's talking about how they realised this was getting out of hand and that people were being awful to each other online in some cases. And he said that they already had some protections, they already had some rules of conduct about online behaviour, but these generally related, as far as harm's concerned, to things like threats of violence or terrorism. And he said we realised we needed to protect people. And he said they started bringing in words like harmful or hateful and things that might be offensive. Things that are quite subjective, aren't they? What I find offensive might just be the truth to you. What I find harmful, you might think is just the truth, again. But now these words were written into the rules. Control freaks love rules, particularly rules that they can use to their own advantage. Then you start to see the meaning of these words change. Because it's subjective, So now I could say what you've just said is offensive to me, and I could say it's hateful or hurtful, and I could get you banished. I could get you kicked out of the kingdom, or I could make sure you didn't ever dare say it again because you get so much attack from people who now had these rules to embolden them. And if anything, it snowballed. For me, the worst mistake was the idea of protecting people and not endorsing the idea of moderating your own reactions and personal responsibility. The other thing about protection is I used to work the door here and there over the years, and people react very differently around somebody that's there to protect them. Some people, they want to be your best mate. For some people, they want to use the fact that you're there to be able to get away with some other stuff because you're there to protect them. Some people want to challenge you because you're a big target. If you're the guy in the room, the bouncer that everyone's going, he's the guy, you're a challenge to that person, they're going to attack you. But overall, the idea that you're the guy in the room protecting people is an incredible ego boost to people who don't have much self-esteem, again, unless they're narcissistic. I remember it pretty vividly, that feeling. And now, Jack Dorsey and others, I realised they were between a rock and a hard place. They had to do something, but now they've put themselves in place as a protector of feelings. There's no physical harm here. It's all about feelings. And nobody abuses the feelings of others to get what they want, like control freaks, particularly coercively controlling people. And you've now just given them the keys to the rule book that they can use to attack anybody they don't like. It might not have been quite so bad if it had stayed online, if we could have separated the online world from the real world. But you've got to understand controlling people want to use rules that will suit them and further their ends. So now you have politicians say, make sure the only things being said is what we like, what furthers our motivation. So they start bringing in laws and they start using the police to enforce these laws to try and squash that speech they don't like that is contrary to what they want. And the other side is that you get corporations, businesses looking at what's going on online and saying there's a huge audience there in these little pockets. If we can get all their eyes looking at us, there's some money to be made there. So they start to position themselves as having a certain type of opinion, trying to pull the eyes in their direction, hoping to make some money off of all this chaos that's going online. What they don't realise is that control always escalates. So you've now given these people permission to start pushing back against your rules that you've now said that you agree with. And these rules are subjective, remember, so those people start demanding things of you. And every time that you give in to them, they step forward. You've just given them permission. And now they're waiting to step forward again, and they will, because control always escalates. And these companies don't seem to have realised it until it's too late. And I would say it's too late now. But what they should do is start saying no. Seems to me we've enabled coercively controlling people. Think about the sort of person that wants somebody's livelihood and life taken away because they've said something they don't like. If you behaved like this with your partner behind closed doors and somebody found out about it, you'd be arrested and charged with coercive control. If you made sure they couldn't say anything they didn't like, if you made sure they couldn't go to work because they'd said something you don't like, if you threatened them with violence because they'd said something that you don't like. This is all coercive control, and we've enabled it. What we've done is we've enabled an army of Littlefingers. These are bad people that just want to coercively control everybody around them to protect their feelings and further their ends. Again, if somebody says something to you online that you don't like, you're responsible for how you react to it. If we talk about the demand, disproportionate benefit and escalation model, the demand in the first instance is a question mark. Unless they come at you with an explicit demand, the first stage is a question. We're trying to ascertain whether or not there is a demand. So if somebody asks you to do something or stop doing something online, there isn't necessarily a demand there, unless it's really obvious. We need to look at disproportionate benefit. But even if there's disproportionate benefit to that person that you stop doing what they want you to do, there isn't necessarily a demand there. The flags are starting to go up. There isn't necessarily a demand. It's at the point of escalation where we can identify that somebody is trying to control you. If they're demanding absolute compliance or else, then it was always a demand and it was never a request. And on the flip side, if somebody comes to you with a reasonable request and you react unreasonably, you're part of the problem. Is it disproportionately beneficial to you to carry on doing what you're doing? Well, then you're still potentially part of the problem. But if you kick off and you threaten them because of what they're saying, you are the problem. You're assuming the position of control, and you were probably already the problem, always. We have to take personal responsibility. It's the only way you're going to get through this. Now, I can't fix social media. No single person can. But if we can endorse and encourage the idea of personal responsibility, we might be able to fix this thing before it's too late. I won't be doing it because I don't do social media, but if you insist on doing social media, it's probably a point of view you should start looking at. But as I say, controlling people shouldn't do social media. I look at all of this behaviour online and I recognise it. And if something makes sense to me or is recognisable to me as something that I would have done, it should ring alarm bells for everyone. And I see the worst of social media as the kind of way I would have behaved. If I hadn't deleted my Facebook account, I would have done this. It's absolutely clear to me. Take some personal responsibility and you'll find your way out of this. Another little story about Game of Thrones just to finish off with. There's another character called Khaleesi. Now, Khaleesi starts off as rather a timid character, and she's married off to a warlord, and he gives her some dragon eggs. And he eventually dies, and she walks into a fire and comes out with these dragon eggs, and they hatch into dragons. And suddenly she's seen as a bit of a second coming, and she starts to get a following. She takes it upon herself to find her way back to King's Landing to take over the Iron Throne and to rule the world. But in the early stages, she doesn't really have bad intentions. She's quite good. She's kind-hearted. And she starts going from city to city and freeing the slaves. And she turns the slaves on their masters, and she sets her army on the masters and says, "You're all free." And this goes quite well with the first couple of cities. And she eventually gets to one, I think it's called Marine, around the end of season 4 going into season 5, and she does the usual. But she's getting a little bit crueler as it goes on. She's getting a little bit hardened by life because she's had some bad situations happen to her. Some people have tried to take advantage of her. So the punishment gets a little bit crueler. She starts nailing people to posts and things like that. But in her mind, she's freeing the slaves. She even takes on part of the name as Breaker of Chains. She thinks she's doing a really good thing. And one day an old man comes to her, he's an old slave, and he says to her, "With respect, you've ruined everything. I was happy where it was. I had a roof over my head, I had food. I was quite important. Even though I was a slave, I was important to the function of that family. Now you've taken everything away. I live on the streets. I could live in the bunkhouses that you've built, but you're full of people there that are just like me, who don't have anything, and everybody's turning on each other. Your idea of kindness is entirely subjective. You've ruined everything for everybody here," and that community starts to turn on her. Might be stretching the metaphor a little bit, but it goes to prove that kindness, harm, offensiveness is entirely subjective, and the outcome might not be what you think it is or what you believe it to be. Take some personal responsibility. Before I go, I just want to remind you about the little X, Instagram, YouTube thing here. Please give us a like. Apparently it's quite important on YouTube, and I want this to reach the right eyes, the people that need help. I'm not necessarily looking for affirmation from anyone else, but I want people to see it who need the help. In the meantime, I'll leave you with this. Control the freak, not other people. Behave.